Gate lives Ansel Adams, musician, mountaineer, writer, teacher, photographer. Light, to Adams as to all photographers, is the great medium of revelation. Through its moods, noon brilliance, first light, dawn, through the illusion of substance, snow, charred wood, stone, and the magic of a place and a moment, he conveys universal experience.
Perhaps music is the most expressive of the arts. However, as a photographer, I believe that creative photography, when practiced in terms of its inherent qualities, may also reveal endless horizons of meaning.
Hi, I'm Dorothy Picella, and welcome to the January 2019 edition of Thrive. We're very excited to have you with us today. I'm very excited to be here because we have a very important session with you to share some wonderful information with you. I'd like to introduce to you my husband, Carmen Picella, and he has had a wonderful career in printing and photography and commercial printing. And part of his background was working with Ansel Adams. And the whole time I've been married to Carmen, it's been great because I always loved telling the story, hearing the story. And now that we live in the village, which has just been over a year, I felt the villagers needed to hear the same great story because Ansel is such an icon in American history that it just shouldn't stay in our little village, in our manor. I thought we really needed to share the experience. So with that, I'd like to introduce Carmen. And Carmen would take some time and tell us this morning, first off about your career and how printing was so important, and then how that ultimately led you to Ansel.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to that. No, in the village here, it's been very enlightening for me working from, and I'm going to take it from the back to the front. Having worked in the village here for the last 14 months, I got to get an very in-depth view of the people that live here. The retired people that live here come from a variety of backgrounds, and the talent in this community is absolutely incredible. The wood shop, the photography department, the jewelry making, the casting, slip casting, and all that in Clubhouse 4. How I got started, it's actually kind of weird because I actually took classes at Saddleback College here back in the 70s, and the marketing class that I had taken, it led me to sort of reach out from my local business to expand to a national business. So it was interesting to be right next door to the Saddleback Emeritus campus here. So it's kind of like a full circle. But I started a business importing photographic paper from Japan. And this was photographic paper. Started the company was Oriental Photo Distributing Company that we founded in 1979. That paper was used by quite a few fine art photographers, black and white, and it's a silver-based photographic paper. So in expanding this product line in the photographic world, I decided to look at the customers that were using the product. And of course, the first name that comes to the top of the list was the most famous photographer probably on the planet at that time, and that was Ansel Adams. AA, top of the list, alphabetical order, number one photographer on the planet. So I picked up the telephone and I dialed his telephone number in Carmel. And lo and behold, his photographic assistant answered the phone, and it turns out that he was a former customer of mine, and that's John Sexton. Just prior to that, I was selling photographic products, printers, enlargers, cameras, lenses, darkroom equipment. And I became kind of a darkroom guru at the time because I was involved with it so deeply. And so John Sexton answered the telephone, and when we connected on the phone, it was like, old school week. So he invited me up, and that's how I got to get in the door. Mm-hmm. And purely from an artistic viewpoint was to meet with Ansel. Because he was the very top, and I wanted to, pick his brain, obviously, to find out how we can begin to market our products on a national basis. He was a very personable person. He was just a great guy. He was basically like a scientist. He had developed a system for measuring light and making images, and it was called the zone system, and it's still in use today by many photographers. But on the other hand is the artistic view of the image in visualization before you make the photograph. It has to do with composition primarily. That's the essence of photography. So you've got composition and you have light. And he was controlling the composition and he was controlling the light. The light, how it reaches the film, and how the film then transposes into printing into a darkroom, which is, that's the third leg of the stool, is the actual execution of the print, the actual making of the print.
And as we talk now in photography, we speak of the external event, which is, we'll call it scenery. It's everything that happens outside in time and space, and people go snap, 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 and recording things for their own memory in the future. And contrasting with that, in the creative work, is the internal event, the thing that happens inside your mind when you see the photograph. And as Stiglitz had said, that when someone asked him about creative photography, what is creative photograph? He said, I merely go out into the world, I want to make a photograph. I come across something that excites me. I see the picture in my mind's eye, and I make the photograph. And then I give it to you as the equivalent of what I saw and felt. The whole key lies very specifically in seeing it in the mind's eye, which we call visualization. And the picture has to be there clearly and decisively. And if you have enough craft, if you've done your homework and your practice, you can then make the photograph that you desire.
Ansel printed all of his own prints. He didn't have anyone else make prints for him. He made every print, and that included the test prints and everything else. He printed everything, and then he developed it, and then he had his assistant take it from the developer to the stop, fix, wash, and post-production. He worked every day. When he wasn't out photographing, he was in his dark room, which was attached to his home. It was the back a good-sized portion of his home in Carmel, right at Point Lobos. He would take visitors at the end of the day. So certain days would be through appointments and what have you. He would have social visitors, and they would come to visit him, pay their respects, and bow down to the Great One. And Virginia would meet him with vodka on the rocks at the end of the darkroom door, and that's what you did when you visited with Ansel. You had a vodka on the rocks. You sat there by his grand piano and would sit there and have a chit chat. It was very social, but also very technical. There would be times where we would be talking shop in the darkroom, and it was very interesting watching him print. You know, all the rest of us photographers at the time, they're all wannabes, Ansel Adams wannabes, and they want to try and emulate that look of the silver print, the final print. But when you're in there, it's like, I guess it's kind of like a religious experience. And I'll just leave it at that. It was quite interesting. So it was technical. We got to talk a lot about how different products work and how they react to different developers and different.
So you were able to spend time with him in the darkroom?
Yes.
So not only did you have a cocktail at 5 o'clock, but you also were in the dark room.
Yeah, we talked shop. We worked around a lot. He was very. The only way I can describe it is a very open person, and he would just share lots of information and be very open about it.
A lot of people wonder what visualization means. It's an awfully long word, but what you have to learn is that the lens sees, the camera sees very differently from the eye, and you have to train yourself to see as the camera sees. In other words, that you see the final picture in your mind's eye. And when you have that, then you go through a series of steps to place the camera and the point of view and the lens, proper selection of the lens, depth of field, all of that. And also considering the values, exposure, and development of the negative. And with a lot of practice, all of this becomes automatic. So you might very readily think that you're never to get a picture done because you had to do so much thinking about it. But actually, it is a very quick and instinctive process.
There was no secrets. It was all open. Whatever he did, he typed it up with his typewriter, and he printed it, and he shared that information with a lot of people. So it wasn't like top secret stuff
Right.
that was going on in the darkroom.
Do you think that characteristic that he had of being very open had an influence on his photography? Because he was not restricted, he didn't have a lens all the time.
He spoke from his heart. When you look at an image, not in a book or in a portfolio, but when you look at any of his major works, the prints that are on the gallery walls, the museum walls, you can feel it. You can honestly, if you're a photographer and you've been there, you know what it takes to get an image, to make an image like that. You feel his soul. So his soul his heart and soul is put into it. Amongst others, he told me, I asked him a long time ago, one of the first meetings, if I could use his name in any of our publications. And this is how open he was. He said, yeah, you can use my name as long as it's along with other photographers that are doing the same types of photography. They called it fine art photography, and it's silver-based. And so I had a whole list of many photographers that were not quite in his level, but very close to it, or just down below the level, and that's how we used his name in our advertising and publications. People that follow him, that followed his footsteps, or that were enthralled in his teaching, will always come down to that. You're writing the composition, and then you're performing it on the actual printing.
Right.
So, yeah, that is inherent in almost any of those photographs. I mean, when you take a digital camera or an iPhone or whatever, camera phone, and you're capturing images, that's all you're doing. You're not physically making print, you're not manipulating that print. Now, if you take it into Photoshop and you start doing all those manipulations and things like that, that's pretty much what he did, but he did it on an analog level with light and darkness, and working in the darkroom and photochemicals.
So one of his most famous photographs is Full Moon. And you mentioned he actually personally told you.
There's two moon
And he
images.
told you how they all came to be. Can
Right.
you share that with us?
The moonrise over Hernandez, New Mexico, is probably the most famous. Second would be the full moon in Yosemite over Half Dome. Those are probably the two most iconic images. The Hernandez image, and this was told to me, we discussed it briefly because by that time, when I had met him, he had already had a whole lifetime of imagery and collecting and gallery printing and like that. So it was kind of like one of those things where you didn't really want to talk about, because it's like a songster that writes a song that plays it 27,000 times and they don't want to talk about it anymore.
Right.
And so it's kind of like when I met him, it was at the end of that time period. But it was an image that normally in making an image, and especially with Ansel, they do a tremendous amount of visualization and visualization, thinking about the print before you make before you capture the image onto the film, onto the negative. So his time was always spent setting up the image,
Right.
getting it all ready and waiting, or even day ahead of time or 2 days ahead of time, checking the sunrise or the sunset, the range of light is the terminology. But so Hernandez, he didn't have that time to do that because it was a spur of the moment thing, driving from one job to another job, and he didn't have the time and to do all of the work necessary to capture that image. And what a lot of people don't realize is that image is not captured the way, it's captured, but then later, at the time he was making the image, he didn't have time to do the right metering, and he just had enough time to get the composition done because he was driving.
There's an interesting story with this. Coming back to Santa Fe after a funeral day up in the Sharma Valley, and I looked out the window of the car, and here was this scene. Well, this is extraordinary. So I practically ditched the car, and I had companions with me. And I started yelling, get me the 8x10, get me the tripod. But I had to take the front part of the lens off and put it on the back of the shutter. Meantime, the sun was going behind clouds in the west, and I was getting panicky, and I couldn't find the exposure meter. And it was very tricky. So the only way I was able to control it, well, I happened to know how bright the moon was in terms of candles per square foot, which is 250 approximately. So knowing where that was and putting that on zone 7 at the scale, I could feed exposure. And for the sake of the photo buffs that are looking at this, I use this G filter at 250 on 7 would be about 60 on 5, and the 3 times filter would be 20th of a second at f8. And I moved it up to long second 32, and I said, I've got a picture, and I put the slide in, turned the holder around to duplicate it, and I pulled the slide out, the light went off the crosses, disappeared.
Oh, the crosses in the photograph.
So the whole image just went dead.
In that second.
So I made it by just a few seconds.
Knowing what you know now and having had that experience, is there anything you wish you had done or asked Ansel that you didn't at the time?
No, I don't think so. I think I would ask him the same questions today that I did then. In other words, you know, having been, it's like being a Monday morning quarterback. Having been on this side of it, there's not too much I would do differently. You know, I can't change.
Right.
I can't change anything. I'm nowhere near the printer or even you know, a scratch on the surface of printing the way he printed, but I learned a lot from knowing how to do certain dodging and burning and certain techniques that you do in the darkroom. And but yeah, I don't think I would ask anything different than when I asked then.
Do you find yourself, when you were doing more printing, did you find yourself asking, what would Ansel do?
Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did that a lot. You know, how would he solve this problem?
Right.
And I mean, it's just one of those things that you had to be there to really understand it. But, and I'm nowhere near the expert. What I'm saying is, I was doing it from a commercial perspective, and so I wasn't relaying that information to the field. What I was doing was relaying that information back to our factory when we were working on different types of papers and what the consumers were looking for, because his followers were my customers.
Yes.
And so they're going to follow whatever he said. Mm-hmm. Like and Ansel said, you know, you can mention my name as long as you mention these other photographers that are following the same suit. So if I look at John Sexton or Bruce Barnbaum or Brett Weston, they were following the same thing, but in a different way. Some of them were copying exactly, and some of them were adding their own spin,
right.
You know, adding their own technique to it. Basically, art is in the eye of the beholder. When you see an image, it's going to speak to you, and it's either going to speak in a really nice voice or you're not going to like it. I mean, that's just the way those images are. Mm-hmm. And there are people that all copy everybody, and that's fine too. Everyone has their own soul, and everyone has to print from their heart. And when they do that work, you know that it's a labor of love. They're not doing it for some commercial purpose. I mean, commercial's fine. That's after the fact. There's always a mentor. Everyone has a mentor somewhere. Whatever, you know, there's photography teachers all over the world that are teaching young photographers, and so they're going to follow that whatever path that is.
Right. Did Ansel do anything in color?
He was a paid consultant with the Polaroid Corporation, and at the time, you know, Polaroid was very popular, and they had made a process by which, you know, most Polaroid prints were 3 by 4 inches, very small, pop out of the camera, peel of paper. And they transitioned also from black and white to color, then made larger cameras, 4 by 5, and then the largest they made was a 20-inch by 24-inch Polaroid camera, which is huge. It's like a building, you know. They had hired him to promote their Polaroid Polacolor, mm-hmm. and that 20 by 24 was set up at the White House in Washington, D.C., and he photographed Jimmy Carter as the President Carter on a 20 by 24 Polaroid camera. And interestingly enough, his assistant, John Sexton, which was my contact there, he visited that, and he was part of that process. So yes, he did color, and it was with Polaroid. And then the only other endorsement that he had two other endorsements. One was with Hasselblad cameras of Sweden, and the other one was with Toyota. So he did the Toyota, and I remember when I was like 19 years old, in my dark room, I had a poster of Ansel Adams in the High Sierras with his camera shooting a tree, or photographing a tree, and it was an ad for Toyota and the Nature Conservancy, how they were, and this is when Toyota was just getting started in the US. So it's a real historical, I don't have the poster anymore, obviously, but I had that poster. So those were his endorsers. So he was endorsing Toyota, Hasselblad, and Polaroid.
Wow, great. Great. Well, that was a great experience.
Well, I've never been interviewed by my wife, which is kind of interesting. Thank you, dear. You did a great job. And I'm thrilled to be with the group here at Thrive, and also in the village. I mean, this village is very important, and I feel like I've made a full circle, having had my original marketing classes here at Saddleback in Mission Viejo, and making this full circle back here, retired, and just having a good time.
It's interesting listening to you talk about his history with trees and Yosemite and what have you. I can't help but think here at the village how much fun he would have had looking at all 30,000 of our trees. And he should have retired here, even though it was Carmel, that's okay. But this would have been his second choice, to be able to photograph all of our beautiful trees.
The number and variety of trees that we have here in the village is totally amazing. Yeah. And if you take a walk through the Aliso Creek Park in our community here, when I walk through there, I'm pre-visualizing, I'm watching him in my mind, setting up the camera at dusk or at dawn, early light, late light, and measuring the light and contemplating the image and thinking about the printing. And I do that when I walk through there. And that's like, I don't know how many years later, 40 years later, still thinking that way.
So the spirit of Ansel still walks in the village.
Anywhere there's a rock and a tree, a cloud, a waterfall, wherever there's nature, there's Ansel.
That's right. That's right.
Ansel Adams, I should say.
Yes.
I hope I helped. As I said, it was just a brief interaction with probably one of the most influential photographers.
I think the thing that's important, Carmen, and when I share that with our friends and people I meet, and every time the reaction is wow. And most people don't have an opportunity to meet such an icon in U.S. history, photography, printing, regardless. And he is an icon. And you had 5 years of that experience.
Yeah, it was on and off.
On and off for 5 years, but just one meeting would be would be monumental. But you were blessed with his partnership, his endorsements.
If you want to see his legacy, check out the Yosemite Center, the Ansel Adams Gallery, because there's a lot of photographers in there, even though they're taking the pictures of the same rocks and the same trees and the same waterfalls. They're all doing it differently. They're all interpreting differently. They're all executing their concerts differently, and they're executing their performances differently.
Right.
But we live in a wonderful world.
Yes, we do.
This is great.
Yeah, this
Thank
is
you,
great.
dear. It was wonderful.
Thank you for your time, Carmen.
Good.